The guards found him grinning. Blood pooled on the concrete floor of the garage, spreading in dark rivulets between his boots. 4 severed fingers lay scattered like discarded cigarettes. Rufe Persful had just used an axe from a fire truck to mutilate his own hand, and he was smiling about it. This wasn't suicide. This was calculated desperation. Because after 9 months inside Alcatraz's D-block isolation cells, Persful had discovered something that would horrify the outside world. There were worse things than death. The psychological torture happening in 6 concrete cells at the end of D-block, known simply as the hole, was breaking men's minds so completely that self-mutilation seemed like a reasonable escape plan. What happened in those cells between 1934 and 1963? Why did federal prisoners, men who had survived the worst America's prison system could offer, emerge from the hole as hollow-eyed shells who couldn't remember to put on pants? And why did the government work so hard to keep these cells hidden from public view? The answer lies in cells 9 through 14 of D-block, where complete darkness, forced nudity, and sensory deprivation became weapons, where men entered as criminals and emerged as something else entirely. This is the story of Alcatraz's most notorious secret, and the real prisoners who couldn't survive it. When Alcatraz Federal Penitentiary opened in August 1934 on a wind-battered island in San Francisco Bay, prison authorities marketed it as escape-proof and America's most secure facility. The 3-story cell house held 4 main blocks, A through D, housing the nation's most dangerous federal prisoners. But it was D-block that held the prison's darkest secret. D-block wasn't just for punishment. It was designed as a treatment block for inmates who violated prison rules, with escalating levels of isolation meant to break defiant spirits. Regular D-block cells meant 24-hour lockdown, meals delivered through a slot, and showers twice a week. But at the far end of the block, past cell 8, the architecture changed. Cells 9 through 14 had something the others didn't: solid steel doors that blocked out every photon of light. These were the hole. The 5 isolation cells measured roughly 9 feet by 5 feet by 7 feet high, barely larger than a closet. Inside, there was no bed, no mattress, no chair, just a sink and toilet bolted to the damp concrete wall. The cell door was solid steel, painted black. When it closed, darkness became absolute. Not the darkness of a bedroom at night, but a suffocating, disorienting void that erased the boundary between eyes open and eyes closed. But cell 14, the last one, was different. Even by the hole's standards, it was monstrous. Nicknamed the Oriental or strip cell, this concrete tomb contained no sink, no toilet, nothing but a small hole in the floor for human waste. Guards placed prisoners in this cell completely naked. 2 blankets arrived around 5 p.m. each evening and were removed each morning. Food came through a slot, typically 3 to 4 slices of bread daily, with 1 full meal every 5 days. Federal regulations limited stays in the hole to 19 days maximum. In practice, prisoners spent anywhere from a few days to, in some documented cases, 3 years. Henri Young arrived at Alcatraz in 1933 for bank robbery and murder. He was educated, articulate, and, by prison standards, mentally stable. On January 13, 1939, he participated in an escape attempt with 4 other inmates, including Arthur "Doc" Barker and Rufus McCain. They sawed through cell bars, climbed out a window, and reached the beach on the island's west side. The escape failed spectacularly. McCain revealed mid-escape that he couldn't swim. forcing the group to waste 45 precious minutes cobbling together a makeshift raft from driftwood. Guards caught them before they cleared the shoreline. Barker refused to surrender and was shot fatally in the head and leg. Young and McCain went directly to the hole. Young testified about his experience during his 1941 murder trial, his words preserved in San Francisco Examiner court records. "You are stripped nude and pushed into the cell. Guards take your clothes and go over them minutely for what few grains of tobacco may have fallen into the cuffs or pockets. There is no soap, no tobacco, no toothbrush." He continued, "The smell, well, you can describe it only by the word stink. It is like stepping into a sewer. It is nauseating. The walls are painted black. Once a day I got 3 slices of bread. No, that is an error. Some days I got 4 slices. I got 1 meal in 5 days, and nothing but bread in between." But the physical deprivation wasn't the worst part. The darkness was. Young described how time dissolved in the absence of light. Hours became indistinguishable from days. Sleep and wakefulness merged. The only sensory input was the smell of excrement and the sound of his own breathing echoing off concrete walls. Young spent portions of 1939 and 1940 cycling in and out of solitary confinement. Estimates suggest nearly 3 years total. Fellow inmates later testified that when he emerged, he was unrecognizable. Mail robber Harry Kelly testified, "He didn't look to me like the same person. He paced his cell at night, talked to himself, passed up his food. Once he started to the dining hall without remembering to put on his trousers." On December 3, 1940, just 11 days after his final release from solitary, Young ran downstairs from the furniture shop to the tailor's shop and stabbed Rufus McCain in the neck with a sharpened wooden spoon. McCain died 5 hours later. Rufe Persful's story was even darker. Born in 1906, Persful had earned the nickname Wanton Killer for murdering 6 men, his wife, and his child. But at Arkansas State Penitentiary, prison authorities discovered they could use him. They gave him a shotgun and made him a high power, a trustee who shot prisoners attempting to escape. Persful killed and disabled numerous prisoners in this role, earning reduced sentences each time. But when word of his past spread at U.S. Penitentiary Atlanta, fellow inmates began severely beating him. Authorities transferred him to Alcatraz in December 1935. The beatings continued. Other inmates recognized him, and the abuse intensified. Persful ended up in D-block solitary confinement after a violent fight. But unlike Henri Young's isolation in darkness, Persful's torture was psychological. In September 1936, he sent a desperate letter to Warden James A. Johnston begging for transfer to McNeil Island. His request was denied. The silence rule at Alcatraz, strictly enforced by Johnston, meant prisoners couldn't speak to each other. For Persful, already paranoid and isolated, the enforced silence became unbearable. No human voice, no conversation, just the echo of his own thoughts spiraling into paranoia. He began claiming an alligator lived in his cell. He attempted to make nooses from bed linens. 9 months after his transfer request was denied, Persful was working in the garage area when he spotted an axe mounted on a fire truck. He took it down. Guards watched in horror as he calmly placed his left hand on a flat surface and, grinning maniacally, chopped off 4 fingers with swift, deliberate blows. A guard and another inmate wrestled the axe away and applied a tourniquet to stop the bleeding. In the infirmary, medical staff had to forcibly restrain Persful. He wanted to finish the job by cutting off his other hand and both feet. The prison psychiatrist diagnosed him with dementia praecox, hebephrenic type, an old term for schizophrenia. In January 1938, authorities finally transferred him to Springfield Medical Center. The incident was so shocking, it triggered one of the few policy changes in Alcatraz's history. Officials relaxed the strict silence rule, but the damage was done. Persful's mutilation became so notorious, it was later dramatized in the 1979 Clint Eastwood film, Escape from Alcatraz. Joe Bowers robbed a post office of $16.63. For this, he received a 25-year sentence and ended up at Alcatraz. The isolation drove him to cut his own throat with glass from his eyeglasses. He survived that attempt, then repeatedly butted his head against his cell door. Eventually, guards shot him to death when he partially scaled a fence and ignored warnings to climb down. Ed Woodke used the blade from a pencil sharpener to sever his jugular vein. He succeeded. Robert Stroud, the famous Birdman of Alcatraz, spent 6 years in cell 42 of D Block in solitary confinement. Of his 54 years in prison, 42 were spent in isolation. Despite the romantic image Hollywood created, Stroud was violent, difficult, and ultimately broken by the system. Guards reported seeing men emerge from the hole disoriented, weak, sometimes unable to walk without assistance. Some were taken directly to the prison infirmary suffering from pneumonia after sleeping for weeks on wet concrete. The cells, located on the bottom tier, were the coldest in the prison. Without heat, clothing, or blankets during the day, men shivered uncontrollably in the damp, frigid air coming off San Francisco Bay. Henri Young's 1941 murder trial became the unexpected spotlight that illuminated Alcatraz's brutal practices. His young attorneys, Sol A. Abrams and James McInnes, announced they would put Alcatraz on trial. They delivered. A parade of the nation's most notorious criminals took the stand. Bank robbers, kidnappers, mail thieves, men who themselves had committed terrible crimes, testified about the unbelievably brutal and inhuman conditions in D Block. Psychiatrist Dr. Joseph Catton, a widely respected expert on criminal psychology, provided damning testimony about the psychological effects of the dark hole. Young described beatings, being thrown down steel stairs while handcuffed, and the absolute darkness that destroyed his sanity. He testified that when he showed Associate Warden E.J. Miller the Federal Bureau of Prisons rulebook about solitary confinement limits, Miller simply responded, "You don't run Alcatraz. I do." The jury found Young guilty of involuntary manslaughter, not first-degree murder, explicitly citing the brutal conditions as a mitigating factor. In their statement, jurors declared the conditions at Alcatraz unbelievably brutal and inhuman. Warden Johnston was furious. The Bureau of Prisons launched an investigation, but officially found no evidence of improper conduct. But the damage was done. The trial brought unwanted national attention to America's most secretive prison. Media coverage revealed details the government had worked hard to conceal. Public opinion began shifting against the extreme isolation practices. By the 1950s, conditions at Alcatraz improved. Prisoners gained privileges like movies, music, and painting. The silence rule relaxed, but the facility remained the most expensive federal prison to operate, and the brutality of its earlier years cast a long shadow. Alcatraz closed on March 21, 1963, officially due to deteriorating facilities and operating costs. But the real reason may have been simpler. The place had become a symbol of everything wrong with America's approach to criminal justice. Today, Alcatraz is a National Park Service site attracting 1.5 million visitors annually. Tour guides lead groups through D Block, pointing to the cells with solid green doors, the hole. Cell 14D is reportedly 20 degrees colder than surrounding cells. Park rangers say they refuse to enter certain cells alone. Visitors report cold spots, feelings of dread, and an oppressive atmosphere that cameras can't capture. Psychics who visited claim to feel intense suffering in the corners where punished prisoners crouched. Some say the cells still echo with the psychological anguish absorbed into the concrete walls. Whether supernatural or simply the weight of history, something lingers in those 6 cells at the end of D Block. Henri Young's fate remains a mystery. He was transferred to Washington State Penitentiary in 1954 to serve a life sentence for his 1933 murder conviction. In 1972, at age 61, he was released and immediately jumped parole. Washington state authorities list his whereabouts as unknown. He simply vanished, perhaps preferring to disappear rather than live with the memories of what he experienced in the darkness. Rufe Persful, the man who cut off his own fingers, survived. Released in 1948, he moved in with relatives in Gary, Indiana. Remarkably, he was never convicted of another crime. He died in 1991 at age 84, having lived most of his adult life with a 4-fingered left hand and the psychological scars from cells where darkness became a weapon and silence became torture. The cells of D Block stand empty now, their steel doors propped open to let in light. But their legacy endures, a testament to what happens when punishment becomes psychological warfare, when isolation becomes torture, and when human beings are subjected to conditions that break not just their bodies, but their minds. Some men entered the hole as criminals, but what emerged, if anything emerged at all, was often something less than human. That was by design. And that's why, decades after Alcatraz closed, those 6 cells remain the most disturbing place in America's most notorious prison.